are going to be balloting over the pay in numbers strategy. And this is a story that we think really needs to be looked at. It's a very serious matter. The health workers feel the need to take industrial action, but the reason they're doing it, as we have pointed out repeatedly in the Dáil over the last number of weeks, is that the government are deceiving the public about what's happening in the health service. They told the country that there was no recruitment embargo as of the summer of this year, but in actuality they imposed it by another name with a pay and number strategy that imposed staff ceilings and staff quotas on all of the health areas, which means, for example, in my area, where this is where I first became aware of it, I got desperate phone calls in September from health workers in St Michael's Hospital, in St Luke's Hospital, in Loughlinstown Hospital, saying maternity leave wasn't being covered, sick leave wasn't being covered, if people retired or left, they weren't being replaced, and there were dangerously low staffing levels across multiple departments, putting patient safety in serious jeopardy and resulting in the utter demoralisation and overworked staff across those hospitals. But in fact, this is something that is right across the health service. So we have unsafe staffing levels, endangering patient safety, and we have an incredibly demoralised workforce of nurses, HCAs, doctors, catering people, porters, every single grade, understaffed and demoralised in many, many areas of our health service and also in community health services. So we will be saying again to the government today, why are you deceiving the public about not having an embargo when in actuality you have an embargo, and will you immediately scrap the embargo and establish safe staffing levels? The unions have been calling for years now for there to be an independent measurement of safe staffing levels in the hospital, in hospitals and in the health service. The government ignored it, and shockingly, Stephen Donnelly, in response to myself and others over the last number of weeks, have started to talk about productivity being the answer. In other words, the health workers have to work harder. That's the answer, rather than them scrapping this disgraceful recruitment embargo, which is now endangering patient safety, exacerbating the crisis in the health service and demoralising our health workers to the point that they feel the need to take industrial action. Secondly, now Paul will elaborate on this a bit more, we will be raising very, very forcefully the fact that the government, in the face of horror that has reached now terrifying levels with Israel's actions in Gaza and Lebanon, that the Irish government continue to speak out of both sides of their mouth on the question of Israel's crimes in Gaza and in Lebanon. I don't know how many people have seen the absolutely horrifying pictures of people burning alive in Alaska Hospital in central Gaza. It may well turn out to be the image that will be remembered forever about the absolutely horrific crimes, the unspeakable crimes being committed by Israel in Gaza, and yet our government mouths words of concern but continue to allow munitions that very possibly were responsible for the burning alive of people in Gaza pass through Irish airspace, and continue to allow Shannon Airport to be used by the US military, and Simon Harris said effectively nothing about US complicity in all of this, in providing the weapons to the United States to carry out these atrocities. It's absolutely disgusting, and we will be challenging the government very, very strongly on that today. Lastly, I just want to mention the fact that I have been asked again, something I've raised repeatedly again over the last number of months, or indeed for years, it is absolutely outrageous that the families and the victims of the Dublin and Monaghan bombings in 1974 are having to take the government to court in order to get the government to provide the Garda files on how their loved ones were massacred in the greatest single atrocity of the entire Troubles. It is absolutely inexplicable and outrageous that those families are having to go to court. So they've asked me again to put it to the government. Why are the government refusing to instruct the Gardaí to cooperate fully with Operation Newham and provide them with the files that will allow them to properly investigate the collusion that almost certainly took place between British intelligence, loyalist killers responsible for that, and what the Irish state knew at the time about those massacres. So that is another important item that we would like to hear some serious answers and action from the government in ensuring that those files are released to Operation Newham.
Just to focus on the horrors that are unfolding in Gaza and Lebanon at the minute. I think people know this has been ongoing for over a year, but I do think many people will have been just struck by the horrifying picture of barbarism, of people burning alive while hooked up to IV machines. I mean, it epitomises the genocide that is taking place in Gaza before the whole world's eyes. And we think it is incumbent on the government to actually do something about it. We're not claiming that the Irish government has the capacity necessarily to stop this genocide, but we think it is incumbent on the government to do everything it possibly can to pressurise the Israeli authorities to stop. And that is not what is currently happening. So, like Richard said, the Irish government, to a domestic audience, which is very supportive of Palestine, which is horrified at what is happening, speaks about that horror, criticises Israel and so on, and relative to, some of the overt support for genocide of other Western governments, the Irish government likes to portray itself as kind of on the right side of history. But when the rubber hits the road, when crunch time comes, again and again and again, the Irish government failed to take any action. So we saw Simon Harris in the White House last week failing to even ask Joe Biden, the man who was providing the weapons that enabled this genocide to take place, failing to even ask him not to provide the weapons. Just a shocking display of spinelessness, of a lack of moral courage to say to the most powerful person in the world, the person who has the power to stop this, please stop this. The Irish people want you to stop providing weapons. That was a real failure. Second thing is to say that, Israel is now chemically attacking UN peacekeepers, using chemical weapons against UN peacekeepers. The Irish government has rightly spoken out against that. Correct. It's correct to make clear statements against it. But how can we continue to have diplomatic relations with a country which is committing genocide in Gaza, which is invading Lebanon, which is now using chemical weapons against UN peacekeepers? It is time to cut all diplomatic ties with Israel. And thirdly, it is time for meaningful sanctions on Israel. We need actions to go with these words of criticism. It is really not good enough. And particularly this point, it is going on a long time now. It is 2 months now since the Ditch first reported on the airlines using Irish sovereign airspace to transport munitions, tons and tons, hundreds of tons of munitions to Israel, potentially being used in these war crimes. But nothing has been done about it. Just last week, the Ditch reported that more flights went through. We know now that Lufthansa has gone through, we know Delta has gone through, we know FedEx has gone through, we know Challenge Airlines has gone through. The Irish government has had an investigation, has confirmed that the initial tranche of flights went through. They're saying they don't know if they had weapons or not, when the Ditch knows. It's clear from information from the Belgian government that there were weapons included. The Ditch knows, is correct on these things. But nothing is happening. And so the Irish government needs to answer questions. We've been pushing for a debate on this now since the Dáil came back. We've said we need to have a debate in the Dáil. We need to have answers from the Minister for Transport, whoever is responsible. They're evading the debate week after week. There needs to be consequences. Are these airlines just going to be able to? So every time we ask about it, the government says, you have to get permission to transport munitions through Ireland, and no one sought any permission. But like, it's happening. We know that they are bringing weapons through Irish airspace without permission. Are there going to be any consequences? Are they going to be continued to be allowed to just fly weapons through Irish airspace? It increasingly looks like the Irish government is just turning a blind eye to this happening. And the truth is, unless the Irish government does everything possible to stop flying munitions to the Israeli military, then the Irish government is complicit in what is taking place in terms of the genocide, in terms of the war crimes unfolding before us.
Can I ask you about the Occupied Territories Bill? And obviously the Attorney General gave the government new advice on that last night. And the Taoiseach this morning saying that it might need to be redrafted, it might need to be redone, but there seems to be a consensus that there is room to play with it and get it enacted. Are you confident that this will be done before a general election is called, or is it a case of the government saying things and not doing things?
Yeah, I think this is the government just kicking for touch beyond the election. I mean, there's no way they're going to have new legislation drafted. We have the Occupied Territories Bill before us for years and years. It was the last term of the government. It was 2018 that we had it before us. It was introduced. It's been before committee. It's been discussed again and again and again. And now, I mean, this just shows how you get whatever legal advice you look for. Legal advice is not some super impartial thing. It reflects the political realities. So previously they were saying, no, we can't possibly touch it. We know that it's reported that Israeli internal communications suggested that Pascal Donoghue reassured the Israelis, don't worry, we're going to use the money message to block it. I think serious questions should continue to be asked about Pascal Donoghue of that. Now they're saying, when they're under massive pressure and they're being criticised and there's protests calling for the bill to be enacted, now they're saying, oh, we have new legal advice and maybe we would enact it, but we'll have to have new draft, and therefore, and I just think that's kicking for touch. We have legislation before it. It should be passed immediately. It should be implemented, and really that should be the start. It shouldn't just be goods from the occupied territories that are being sanctioned. It should be all goods from Israel, given what is happening.
Just to add something briefly to that. See, the government are trying to cover their deliberate obstruction of the Occupied Territories Bill and the other demands for sanctions on Israel by now talking about a new legal context. Now, in fact, as we were the first to point out in the Dáil back in November of last year, and we would urge people to look at it again, under the Genocide Convention, any state that is a signatory of that state that believes there's even a possibility of a genocide taking place is required to take any and all actions within their power to attempt to deter the commission of a genocide. That is clearly set out in the Genocide Convention. So the claim that because of the more recent ruling that provides them with the legal justification, yes, it adds to the legal justification, but they had more than enough legal basis for doing it under the terms of the Genocide Convention. And furthermore, that Genocide Convention requires them to do a lot more than pass the Occupied Territories Bill, which is a minimal demand simply to stop trading with settlements on the West Bank and in Gaza. The demands of the unprecedented movement that we have seen on the streets and that was present at Shannon Airport again at the weekend is not simply to pass the Occupied Territories Bill, but it is to end the use of our airspace by any airlines that are transporting weapons to Israel, to end the use of Shannon by the US military itself, to, for example, instruct the central bank to stop facilitating the sale of Israeli war bonds, which I think is another story that really needs to be focused on. I mean, Gabriel Makhlouf, I'm on the Finance Committee, confirmed last week Ireland is the main hub in Europe for selling Israeli war bonds that are being touted explicitly as to finance Israel's actions in Gaza and now in Lebanon. It's absolutely unbelievable that Ireland is the hub for this. It is highly questionable whether even the limited financial rules of the EU should not require the Irish government to take action, but surely being signatories of the Genocide Convention overrides any of these financial rules, which requires states to take any and all actions they can to deter the commission of a genocide.